Hi everyone, and welcome to our first lecture of the semester. Today we're going to be focusing on Chapter 1 from your textbook entitled Crime and Justice in the United States. So, as I said in the syllabus lecture, this course is sort of an overview of all the different aspects of the criminal justice system, and specifically this chapter really just gives you an overview of from start to finish when a crime happens, what takes place. So most of this information you're probably going to already know as you've encountered people who engage in crime, or maybe even watch things on TV and see how the criminal justice process goes. But we're just going to review it briefly today so that everybody is on the same level and is coming in with the same amount of knowledge. So starting off, we see that crime is an everyday occurrence. It's very rare that you don't hear about something happening in your community or in the nation or across the world. We're bombarded through the media with reports of crime in everyday life. So everybody thinks that if this much crime is taking place that the media has to report on it all the time, or we're seeing all these shows that reinforce the idea that crime rates are on the rise, we should probably really be concerned about what's happening in our nation and in our communities and across the globe. It's probably in everybody's best interest for the crime rate to go down. However, when we see these media reports and we see the extreme examples of what's going on, it sort of reinforces the idea that the crime rate has to be on the rise in order for these reports to make sense. But keep in mind that these sensationalized stories help the media sell reporting, right? Everybody likes Law and Order Special Victims Unit because we can wrap it up nice and neat in an hour. We see the victimization happen, we see that the cops come in and they're going to get the bad guy and solve the crime in an hour, but it's not a very accurate picture of what happened. It's not something very accurate that we can clean up in an hour. Sometimes these cases never get solved. Sometimes there's not enough evidence to figure out what's happening. Sometimes in the media, when we see a crime being reported, we don't see the follow-up of that crime. We just see the arrest take place, or we just see the conviction take place. And we don't necessarily feel like it's being representative of crime that really takes place on a daily basis. So when you're watching TV or you're watching the news, take these items with a grain of salt. Really, what we see, crime on an everyday level, is going to be found on table 1.2 in your textbook, and I will show you that on the next slide. Most crime that takes place in a daily action, or most things that involve the police on a daily basis, are probably going to be traffic events. It's not going to be rapes and murders and all of the sensationalized types of crime that happen. Sure, it does happen on a daily basis where these things occur, but more routine types of activity take place with I ran the stop sign and now I've gotten a ticket, or I was speeding too fast and now I have a ticket for that. So sometimes that's the more accurate picture of what's happening. Sometimes if somebody calls something in, the suspect has run away, or police arrive on scene and everything has died down and there's no need for their presence anymore. So when they do respond to calls, sometimes they don't even get a suspect. Sometimes they can't even make an arrest. Or if they're called to the scene, sometimes there's not even a crime that's occurring. Little Johnny, his puppy ran away, and we have to call the police to see if we can get the puppy back. Something like that, where you would call the police and it's not really a criminal call, you just need help with something. Or I'm stranded on the side of the road because my car broke down, and law enforcement is the first response unit to get to you. Not a crime, but these are the things that police have to deal with on a daily basis. So here's that table, and I'm not going to go over it all with you guys, but you can see here the first couple incidents in which police are called. Parking violations, non-injury of a traffic accident, I rear-end someone, nobody's hurt, but we have to clean it up and we have to make sure that everybody exchanges insurance, stuff like that. It's more rare that they have to deal with dangerous crimes and they have to deal with bomb recoveries and things that you see all over the news. Most oftentimes, being a cop, you don't have to do that. You just deal with some of the everyday routine activities that people are engaging most often with. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the system overall. So let's say a crime really does happen, that the arrest needs to be made and things like that. When we talk about the criminal justice system as a whole, we're really talking about a nation worth of agencies that are interconnected to form this criminal justice system. But there's really not one specific one that we can refer to as the CJ system. However, if in your hometown the CJ system might be the Tyler Police Department, might be the Smith County court system, and it might be the local jail or prison that you would go to post-conviction, and that's your criminal justice system as you know it. So most of them are going to be comprised of police, courts, and corrections, the three different stages in which you would engage in with the criminal justice system as a whole. So the police are most often your first step. As we said, the police have a variety of different functions. Often it's not crime related, but let's say it is. So first, somebody calls in or the police become aware that a crime has been committed. An investigation has to take place, finding out the facts of what's going on. If there is a suspect, then an arrest could be made. If there's probable cause that that person might have been the one to do it, then the police can successfully make an arrest. They can detain, they can seize, they can search. Warrants are normally needed for that. If they have to do a search or a seizure of property, a judge has to issue a warrant for that to take place. And we'll talk about all of the specifics that are involved with that in later chapters, but this is just giving you a rundown of the order in which things have to occur. So the police make an arrest, they take you in just like you see on TV. Pretty similar type of situation. They take you into the police station and now they have to book you. That normally means that they're going to find out some information from you, run you through the system, make sure that they have everything that they need on you, make sure that there's not any outstanding warrants against you, take your photograph, take your fingerprints, do all of that good stuff, and then put you in a jail cell until the next phase of your arrest and booking can take place. Okay, so the booking, as we said before, fingerprints, which you see in the picture to your left, and a mug shot that they take on the right. So this is an old mug shot of Frank Sinatra when he was arrested when he was very young. But you can see here that they have to take a picture of you from the front and a picture of you from the side that goes into your file. And you can often see online websites that have mug shot photos and things like that. That's really what it is. They're just making sure that they have an accurate photo of you at the time of your arrest and that it is you that is being processed through. So if you look on Frank's neck, you have a little identification board that has your intake number. Most oftentimes anymore, you're not going to have that little board, but they're going to electronically put that into the photograph with you, and this mug shot, this booking photograph is going to go with you as you navigate through the system. The same with your fingerprints. It's just going to be an accurate identification that it is you, and it's really for administrative purposes only. So now that you are booked, you are now going to transition from the police role into the court's presence of your case. So the police are going to press charges against you, and now you have to go in front of a court for your initial appearance. This is basically you just going in front of a judge. The defendant is given formal notice that the police have charged him or her with these certain charges. The defendant is again reiterated that they have a right to have an attorney present. They make sure that the defendant is well aware of the charges, understands everything that is brought up against them, and make sure that the defendant knows what it is that is going to happen from here on out. If you are there on a misdemeanor charge, most oftentimes you might just have it settled while you're there. Misdemeanor charges can be settled during your initial appearance, but more often than not, felony charges are going to need a second hearing. So during your initial appearance, if you are there for a felony charge, you're going to have a bond hearing. And the bond hearing is basically going to say, is this person trustworthy enough that if we release them back into the community, he or she will not flee the country or flee the state? So basically, if they say yes, they release you on bond, and it's however much money you have to put up. So let's say your bond is $100,000. Most oftentimes you would have to put up 10% of that $100,000 bond, or you would have to put up something as collateral. Most people don't have $10,000 to just hand over to the court, and will put up a car or maybe put up their house as collateral for the bond. If you put up this collateral or you give money for the bond, if you decide to flee, then the court can take that money from you. This is basically just a goodwill gesture that you're going to stick around and you're not going to leave the country. Oftentimes, defendants have to give up their passport, hand it over to make sure that they cannot leave, and somebody will supervise you when you're out on pretrial release. So this is just making sure that you're going to show up to your next hearing. If bail is not given to you, then you will just stay in the jail until your next hearing is scheduled. Okay, so you might be saying, well, what's the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony? I've heard those words before, but I don't exactly know what it is. So really, there are three types of crime that you can be charged with. The first is going to be an ordinance, and this is more of your traffic violations, things that can be paid by tickets. So if I speed or if I'm going to run a stop sign and the police catch me and pull me over, they'll give me a ticket because I have violated the traffic ordinance for the place that I was in. And that is usually just penalized by a fine that you can pay off. In comparison to both misdemeanors and felonies, these are more things that you can be incarcerated for. So a misdemeanor is definitely the less serious of between that and a felony. And if you think about it in terms of incarceration time, misdemeanors normally do not go above a year. So you're not put in jail for more than 1 year. But a felony is when you go to prison for a year and a day or more. That's normally going to be the distinguishing factor in terms of incarceration between the two. And of course, the felony is the more serious of the two. This is where your violent crimes come in. Felony murder, robbery, assault, things like that. Misdemeanor is probably not going, you're never going to have a misdemeanor charge for murder. This is going to be more drug charges, just simple possession, things like that, where you don't really have a victim that you're harming, but still goes against the, the state laws that prohibit these types of things. So just think misdemeanor is the less serious of the two. I'm going to jail instead of prison. Felonies, I'm going to prison instead of jail, and it's more of the violent types of crimes for you to be able to distinguish between the two. Okay, so I have been charged with my crime. The judge has either let me out on bond or has decided that I need to stay in jail until my next hearing. So now my next hearing has arrived. If there is enough probable cause, the judge is going to make sure that the defendant is held for an indictment. And what an indictment is saying is that a grand jury needs to investigate this more and needs to make sure that the charges against the defendant were the proper ones to be pressed against him. So if you remember, probably the last really famous case that we had where the grand jury was heavily involved and an indictment was released against this person was the Jerry Sandusky trial. If you remember back maybe 2 or 3 years now, when Jerry Sandusky, when the charges were released against him, the court decided to release the indictment papers. And if you had a chance to read those, you could go through and see the investigation. And basically what a grand jury investigation is like a mini trial. The prosecutor is going to try and bring witnesses in and convince the grand jury that this individual needs to be indicted on these charges or more. So when it happened to Jerry Sandusky, the grand jury was in a room and the prosecutor brought in witnesses and had people testify about whether or not they knew if Jerry Sandusky was molesting children on the Penn State campuses. And at the end of that grand jury investigation, the grand jury felt like there was enough evidence to indict Jerry Sandusky on charges related to child abuse and child sexual assault. So they went ahead and they pressed formal charges against Jerry, and he went to trial, and we all know now that he was found guilty for those charges. So your indictment is another way for those charges to be brought against the defendant. All right. So continuing on, once these charges have been formally filed against the defendant, we now have to have an arraignment. And at the arraignment, this is basically the time where the judge says, so-and-so, how do you plead against the charges that have been brought up against them? And at this point, people will either say guilty or not guilty. If you say not guilty, then that person is going to go onwards towards a jury trial or a bench trial. However, most people decide not to go that far, and they will plead guilty. At this point, the prosecutor has had time to talk to the defense attorneys and has brought what we call a plea deal to the defense attorney and said, in exchange for a guilty plea and in exchange for not taking this all the way to trial, we will lighten the sentence against your client. So if it's a murder case, let's say, and we have enough evidence that we think we can seek the death penalty, what might happen is that the prosecutor would go to the defense attorney and say, if your client pleads guilty to the murder charges against him or her, we will not seek the death penalty, and we will instead just charge your defendant with enough of a charge that your client would just get life in prison with the possibility of parole. That's the sentence that they would end up seeking and take the death penalty off the table. However, the client or the defendant at this point would not have to take that plea deal if he or she felt like they were really innocent. So if they said, there's no way on earth I killed this person, I'm completely innocent, I'm going to trial, and the jury is going to recognize that, they do not have to take the plea deal. It is a gamble. If you decide that you're going to go to trial, you have to be absolutely sure that you're going to win, or that your attorney is good enough to get you acquitted of the charges, because sometimes the sentences can be actually more than if you were to take the plea bargain. For example, using our murder example once more, if I go to trial, the jury might find me guilty and sentence me to the death penalty, where all I was getting before was life with the possibility of parole had I taken the plea. Luckily, a lot of people decide to go this route. Over 95% of our criminal defendants are going to take a plea deal and are going to plead guilty. If you think about how many people go through this process on a daily basis, if everyone had stated, I'm innocent, I'm going to jury trial, we would never get any cases all the way through. The court is already very, very backed up, given that 95% of the defendants plead guilty. Can you imagine how much more backed up it would be if everybody decided to go to trial? Just something to think about. Okay, so if I plead not guilty, then I go to trial. If I plead guilty, then I'm going to just go straight to my sentencing. So let's say I go to trial. So I've pled not guilty, I've gone to trial, and now if I am found guilty at the time of my trial, then I go to sentencing. If I go to the trial and I am found not guilty, then I am released with no other penalty associated with me. I would not have to go to prison. I would not be incarcerated. I would be a free person. So a not guilty verdict at trial is what everybody's after, but it's not very frequent where that occurs. So if I'm found guilty, either at the pretrial stage or if I'm found guilty at the trial stage, my next link in this line is to go to my sentencing. Okay, so at the portion where I'm going to the sentencing, there are a variety of different things that can happen to me, and oftentimes these things happen in concurrence with one another. So right now there are 5 types of punishment available in the United States: fines, probation, intermediate punishments, imprisonment, and death. Sometimes you get a mixture of these. So if I'm going to prison, let's say I get a 10-year prison sentence. At the end of my 10-year prison sentence, I might be sentenced to 5 years of probation. And we will go through what probation means later, more in depth. But basically, probation is I'm released back into the community, but somebody is still supervising me. So I still have to report into my probation officer. I still have to make sure that I'm not in violation of any of my probation conditions, because if I do violate, then I might go back to prison. So it's sort of a conditional release. You're released from prison and you're back in your community, but you're not necessarily free of government supervision. So that's what probation is in a nutshell. And in addition to my imprisonment sentence and my probation sentence, I might be ordered by the court to pay back a number of fines. Maybe in my crime, I assaulted and I burglarized and I robbed somebody. So maybe I have to pay back what it is that I stole from the burglary and from the robbery. If I have stolen a lot of goods and my victim is out that money, maybe I will be fined for that. There's a variety of different things that can go in combination with one another, but these are frequent punishments. Death, of course, is only going to be applied to somebody if they kill their victim, and we know from a variety of different states in this country that the death penalty is still readily applied. Okay, so one of the last things that I want to talk about in this lecture is the idea of the two models of criminal justice. So we have the due process model and the crime control model, and they sort of fit on two ends of the political spectrum. People that have more liberal ideologies tend to go towards the due process model, where people who have more conservative values go towards crime control. And then the next couple slides I'll sort of hash out what each of these are. But know for now that the crime control model has always been a little bit more popular than due process and is the one that we are currently using right now in our system of criminal justice. All right, so crime control model is basically us trying to limit the amount of crime that takes place in our country. We assume that people will always commit crime. If there is a temptation to steal and nobody is guarding the item that I want to steal, what is prohibiting me from stealing that item? So we just believe on a basic human nature that people will always commit crime. So we're trying to limit the amount of crime that they are able to engage in. So the key to the crime control model is this presumption of guilt. We believe that you're going to do it. If we caught you at the scene of the crime, if we believe you are a suspect, you're probably guilty of it. If there was enough evidence there and there was enough time and effort and resources put into the police investigation that resulted in your arrest, probably you are the guy who did this. Then the suspect has to be guilty. So that results in punishment. All of the court issues, those are just a formality, but if we have enough on you to arrest you, then you're probably our guy and you're the guy who has to be punished. So if you look at it from that perspective, this is all about solving crime and punishing people for the crimes that they have engaged in. A little bit different from the due process model. The due process model does not believe in guilt. They believe in the presumption of innocence. And there is also this belief in a difference between factual guilt and legal guilt. So in order for us to be factually guilty, you have to prove that in court. You have to bring up enough evidence against me. It is the prosecutor's job to prove that I am guilty. I don't have to prove my innocence. You have to prove my guilt. And you have to do that on a legal basis that fulfills the letter of the law. It's not circumstantial evidence. If I am brought to court on charges of rape, let's say, you have to prove that there is DNA on my victim. You have to prove that that DNA is mine. You have to have me on camera. You have to have beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am the person who engaged in this rape. So really what this is suggesting is not that you arrested me so I had to have done it. This is saying is, yeah, okay, you arrested me, you think I am the suspect, but you have not proven that I am factually and legally guilty. You have enough probable cause to make the arrest, but you do not have enough evidence to convict me of this crime. And there is a total difference between the two. So make sure as you're going through and we're learning about the different fundamental aspects of the criminal justice system that you have these two separated out in your mind, because there is a strong fundamental difference between the two different models. All right. So as I said before, the crime control model has been the one that the United States criminal justice system has been working on for a while, and really since the 1970s, this has taken a fundamental stand in the way that we practice our court system and how police go about their jobs and how the correctional institutions run their facilities. So we have this strong emphasis on punishment. If you engage in a certain crime, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to go to prison, and it's going to be for a prolonged period of time. There is no amount of thinking that says, well, if I'm a drug offender, maybe I'm addicted, and my addiction is fueling my crimes. Maybe instead of putting me in prison, the right idea is to put me through rehabilitation. Get me clean, get me off of the substance that I'm addicted to, help me find a job, go through the proper steps of rehabilitation. Instead, the solution would be, under the crime control model, I'm addicted to drugs, the addiction is causing me to engage in criminal behavior. We have to punish both the addiction and the criminal behavior in the same breath. So by going to prison, I am sort of killing two birds with one stone, if you will, and I'm taking care of the punishment for the criminal behavior, and also, as a side effect, I'm getting clean from the substance that I'm on. People dry out in jail and dry out in prison pretty fast because there's not as many substances. I'm not going to say there's no substances in prison, but there are less substances than there are available on the streets. So sometimes the addiction leaves me while I'm serving my time for the crimes that I've committed. However, we do see some elements there. There are still some treatment programs in prisons and in the community once I'm released. We still have hope that people are going to be rehabilitated and not commit crimes. There's just not a whole lot of money out there to back up the idea of rehabilitation, and nobody really wants to appear to be soft on crime. Politicians, law enforcement, nobody really wants to be that person who let a criminal fall through the cracks, right? We don't want anyone to fall through and go out and commit another crime, because then that just reinforces the need to make sure that crime control becomes the focus for us. So there are some aspects of it, but predominantly the crime control model typically wins out, and that's what our criminal justice system focuses on the most. Okay, so the very last thing that I want to talk to you guys about in this lecture is the cost of criminal justice. It's very expensive to run these different entities, and it takes a lot of tax dollars to be able to fund them. But there's not as much money going towards these different divisions as probably is needed. For as many people as that funnel through the systems every year, there's just not enough money to be able to take care of it. So about 4 cents to every tax dollar is spent on criminal justice. That's not enough. But if you think about how many other cents are going everywhere else, education, different economic programs, making sure that people are fed, healthcare, things like that, there's just not enough money left over for criminal justice. But people are in support of the idea that we need to spend more. So if you think about where all that money is going to, it's normally to the front end and to the back end. So all the money is going to police and to corrections, mainly to corrections, and even then it's still not enough. You hear on the news all the time that people are being released from prisons in hordes because we just don't have the right amount of money that is necessary to keep them incarcerated. So the most likely outcome for that is just to have to release them in droves. So mainly it's going to the front end and the back end, but I think everybody would argue that everyone could do with more money if it was available for us. But on average, about $258 billion a year is going towards the criminal justice system, and it's still not enough. So think about how much you would really need in order to be able to fund these organizations properly. Okay, so this last table, what I'm showing you guys is sort of just a breakdown of where all the money goes in terms of percentages. You see here that it's normally towards police protection and it's going to go towards corrections. So those two are the big ones, with the court system falling somewhere in the middle. So you see just a breakdown of where that $258 billion in 2009 went to in these different organizations. All right. So that's really all I have for you guys today for this lecture. As I said in the syllabus lecture, they're not going to be very long in terms of what I'm going to talk to you about. Really, it's just going to be a brief overview of what the chapter is. So in the next lecture, what we're going to do is talk about crime and its consequences in both a legal aspect and also in a social aspect. What happens after I go to prison and what happens to the people that I leave behind. Some of that stuff. So make sure as we go through these lectures and as we go through this unit that you're keeping up with the specific pages I have you guys read. Make sure you're reading or you're watching these lectures and keep track of everything to make sure that you're on time with all of your scheduled assignments and quizzes and papers and such. So, if this has gone well for you guys, I will see you next lecture. If you guys still have more questions, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to clarify as much as I can for you guys about what I have talked about today. So I will see you in lecture 2 for crime and its consequences, and I wish you guys a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!